So the live build with Bubble, gonna wait a few more minutes for people to join. Meanwhile, if someone wants to talk to Theo and ask him something, go ahead. Doesn't have to be related to Bubble. You can just ask him.
Yeah, so the program is you go through the game and you like, go for your entrepreneurial journey as you go through the game, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. We've tried to create a simulation, a copy of the real world. Of course, for now, pilot that's quite limited, but still, certain things are very lifelike, and they, of course, the users are not used to these things, so they're asking us questions like, "Hey, where the hell is my money when I come to the office?" So I have to explain. Listen, you come to the platform, and you, as a user, as a person, you have your own piggy bank, your own wallet, where you earn tokens because you go through modules, a skill lab, do things for us. And then when you come to the office, you are already part of the company, and your company has a different bank account, which at the start of the game has nothing in it because you're just a new company. You can transfer money back and forth, but remember that if you do so from the company to your personal account, you better have a damn good reason to do this, like salary or stuff. Otherwise, that's going to look like embezzlement. And anytime in the game, tax authorities can come and ask, "Hey, can you send me a screenshot of your transactions, because we want to take a look if you're behaving well." So it's these kind of things that are very close to real life. And of course, there's a lot of legal stuff that they have to go through. They have to sign shareholders agreements. They have to decide on like who's putting how much equity into the company. One of them has to be the team leader that has control over certain things. Then as the team is formed, they go through quests, then they have to meet a mentor, they have to meet an investor, and it's all, of course, different dynamic because investor wants more money, so wants them to win more quests and go higher and higher. Mentor wants them to earn skills and knowledge, so pushes them towards educating themselves. So it's this whole, pull and push into different directions, and of course, the entrepreneur has to decide for herself what it is that she wants to do, because ultimately it's her decision, and if she makes the wrong call, that's fine. It's a failure from which you learn, you do again, you repeat, you iterate, you fail again, and then eventually this is how you progress. So that's a bit how it's built.
Cool, awesome. I guess like because you started recording, so maybe we should dive in. Cool, awesome. So I'll just share my.
Yes, I gave you the rights to share your screen, so you should be fine.
Cool. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Cool. Well, good afternoon. I think most of you are from the Netherlands or from Europe, so it's the afternoon for you. My name is Theo, and as I said, I live in New York and work for Bubble. Today, I'm going to tell you all about why, at least we think, you don't need to fight for engineers' attention anymore. And what I mean by that is, if you're like today, if you're trying to start a company and there's a strong tech component to it, I think Female Switch, for example, is a very good example, right? Because it's a virtual platform. There's a lot of technology to be built in order to create the experience you're all going through right now. You need to build technology, and for that you need engineers, or at least you used to need engineers. And you quickly run into a big problem. That is the fact that there's very few engineers out there that are very competent and can build full stack web applications. The statistic is actually, I think, 0.3% of the world's population that can code, and that's a super low number, especially considering that I think over 60% of tomorrow's GDP is digital. And so this is why, for example, in the US, if you want to hire an engineer, it's going to cost you on average over $100,000 to bring on an engineer. So unless you have a brother or a sister or a cousin that can code, and that will help maybe do it for free or become like your co-founder, it's going to be very expensive. And so it's going to cost you over $100,000 and maybe 5 to 10% of your company. And you just have an idea, right? You may still pivot. And so we kind of see that as a huge blocker to innovation. And so this is why we created Bubble, to kind of open up access to technology and bring more people into the industry by allowing them to build technology themselves rather than having to fight for engineers' attention. So just quickly jumping into to Bubble and the platform that we built. Today, Bubble is the leading platform to build powerful web applications without code. And so it's a full service application, because on Bubble you can design, develop, and deploy a web application all in one place with our editor, or drag and drop visual editor. And we also have, like, it's also a cloud hosted platform, meaning you don't need to pay for hosting. All you need to do is to buy a domain name, right, for your app, and then everything else will happen in Bubble. You just connect your domain to your Bubble app, and then you can deploy it, and then it's live, right? Talking about like who are the Bubble user and who we built the platform for. Our users use Bubble to launch like real and scalable products. Very early on, the two founders, Emmanuel and Josh, focused on the startup community as a core audience. So for context, I think Josh started the company, and then Emmanuel quickly joined him. And Josh used to, for some time, he was kind of a CTO for hire, where he was working with different people, helping them build the technology side of their company. And he worked with this guy on this company for about 6 months, I think. And eventually, it was a really good idea, but it was going to be a small company. It wasn't going to like change the world necessarily. And it wasn't exactly what Josh was super passionate about. So eventually he left, and when he left, the company died, right? Because without a CTO, there was the technology component of the company was too big for the founder to be able to continue without Josh. And so that's when Josh realized that's what he wants to build for. He wants to build for all these non-technical founders, the founders that have great ideas, that could be small, medium, or even massive businesses, but don't have the technical capabilities to build the product. Which is why we built that platform. So the startup community, the entrepreneur and intrapreneur, is really the core audience. And a common denominator amongst entrepreneurs is they need to launch products quickly and iterate fast on them, to quickly get to MVP, to quickly validate their idea, and quickly get to the next milestone, whether it's like the first user, the first dollar, the first funding, etc. You know, talking about like how over the years we've seen some success, quite a bit of success actually. It took some time, but eventually we got there. One team that was building on Bubble, they built a solar panel financing company, and they were called Dividend Finance, and they were able to raise as much as $360 million for their company, having built most of the technology on Bubble. And so that for us was a huge validation, that you can build real scalable venture-backed businesses. A few other companies got into like very successful accelerators or incubator. Some of you may be familiar with YC. It stands for Y Combinator. It's one of the biggest and most prestigious accelerator in the world, I think. And again, a third interesting denominator amongst our user is that most of them are profitable. Again, because they don't have to make such expensive investments in technology. They can build on Bubble or with no code, and build very quickly and very cheaply. And we're actually starting to see Fortune 500 companies, so enterprise, starting to use the platform for production application. So we're starting to see some usage there. Like obviously this sounds great, right? But like it didn't happen in a day. We got here after many years of R&D, and we're now at the point where we can start to scale aggressively the company. So the company is actually 10 years old, right? It was started, I think, mid 2012. And the two founders, really, it was just the two founders for 7 years, right? So it was a really long journey where they were just bootstrapping the product and trying to get to product market fit. Obviously, in order to make it very simple for everybody to code visually, it's very complex on the back end. And so they spend the first 7 years really focusing on the product, trying to nail down all the basic feature set and make it good enough so that most people could use the platform to build anything they wanted on the web. And the goal is really to remove any roadblocks for our users. And so fast forward a couple of years, in 2019, we kind of got to product market fit, and that's when the founders had already started to hire the first few engineers and really build the team, but it was focused on product. And we raised like a small Series A. A small seed round, I think of about 6 million. It's actually a pretty big seed round. And then most recently, last year, during the summer of 2021, we closed a large Series A, $100 million funding round, to really start to scale the company and build like the go-to-market team, the success team, the education team, and really try to expand our footprint through like education and evangelization. And the reason I'm sharing these metrics and this journey is to really tell you that, you know, if you start your bubble journey today, you're not alone, right? Like we've been doing this for 10 years. There's now over 2 million users that have built on the platform. We're very well funded. We're growing the team. I think I joined about 9 months ago. There was about 55 people in the company. Now we're about 85. I think we're on track to be 130 by the end of the year. And there's like an extremely engaged community and ecosystem of builders all over, right? So for example, a lot of you from the Netherlands, we have quite a few very successful users from there. There's a big community in the UK and France. So really the message here is that if you do decide to start your bubble journey, I think now there couldn't be a better time to do so. So just enough of like just talking about the product. I think what's more interesting is to actually show the product. So what we're gonna do, and I invite you all to join me if you want. You can either just follow along and then obviously use the recording to go and try to rebuild some of the basic stuff that we'll build today, or you can go to bubble.io and hopefully you've already went to Bubble and signed up for a free account, but you can do that quickly right now. And we're gonna look at the editor and then build like some basic component of a to-do app, and then I'll share some resources on like our academy and how to learn various resources. I do want to mention that we actually have credits for any female switch member. So you don't need to pay for Bubble at the beginning, right? There's a very generous, I think, free plan, and you can do a lot of the learning without spending anything on the platform. But if you do want to take it to the next step and, for example, deploy your app, right, or like connect to like advanced feature like payment, right? We use Stripe to process any payment. You'll need to be on a paid plan, and at that point, you can use the female switch credits. I think we have a $200 of credits valid for 3 months. So the idea is your first 3 months on a paid plan will be covered by the credits, so by female switch. And so I invite you to definitely leverage that. You can reach out to me or the female switch team to inquire about these credits. And yeah, that should be all the info you need. So maybe I'll stop. I mean, while I'm moving to Bubble, feel free to like just shout if you have any questions, and I'll move to Bubble. So right now I'm on just bubble.io/home. You should, if you've signed up for an account, you should be able to end up on the home. Like obviously you won't see any apps because you haven't created any yet, but this is where you should be. And if you're not here, you can go on menu, my apps, and it will bring you back here. I think there's a question or hand that was raised, so I'm just gonna quickly.
No, that's just me writing to them that if they want the credits, they have to reach out.
Oh, awesome, cool. If you could, because we're using Google Meet and I have to switch tabs to see the question, if you could just shout anything you see in the chat that I should be aware of, I'll just answer it.
I'll absolutely do that. And just one little note for everyone, I'm pretty sure everyone knows, but still, Bubble is actually what we use to build female switch with. So just you know that is possible. And if something is not working, it's not my fault. Theo, it's your fault. Just
That's awesome. Yeah, I want to go. I'll check it out. So you build the actual game, right?
Yes, we build everything on it, and of course, the developers had to fix a few things with their developy styles just because to make it quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, yeah, everything like 99.9% of that is built with Bubble.
Cool, that's awesome. Well, that's a great example. So cool. So if you do want to build with me and you're not on this page, feel free to like write in the chat or just say that you're stuck and you need help, and I'm happy to help you try to find your way here. But if not, I'll just get started. So what we want to do here is just click on new app because we're going to create a new app and play around in it. So you can give it any name you want. You can't. The name has to be unique. So if we all type female switch demo, it's not going to work. I'm just going to do demo. Oh, I think it doesn't like the dash like that. There you go. No space and no dash. So what kind of app? We're just asking a couple of questions to try to understand what apps are built by users, but you do need to answer these, but you can kind of say whatever you want. Say we're building an internal tool, we're just playing around. This is optional. Then this is, we're not going to use this today, but I think it's something that's good to know. So we have a huge template marketplace. And so these are bubble templates to build like social networks or like an Uber-like app or like a dashboard-like app. And they're not built by us, they're built by the ecosystem. Again, I said like one of the strengths of Bubble is like its community. You have a really engaged community of users, and there's, I think, thousands, if not tens of thousands of templates that you can use. Because they're built by users and not by us, they can like charge whatever they want for it. So some of them are free, some of them are paid. And if you download a template, whenever you create a new app, you can like start from templates. So you see that I've downloaded 2 templates, and so I can pick any of these to start. But today I don't want to start from a template. The few other things that I'll mention here is, as you can see here, you can actually hire someone to build your app. So obviously, we built Bubble in order to like drastically lower the cost and time it takes to build technology. But for some people, they don't necessarily want to do that, right? They want to focus on the business side of things, and they want to just have somebody to help them and build the technology. And that's actually something that you can absolutely do with Bubble. And it's still going to be so much more interesting, I think, than working with an actual developer, because it's going to be much cheaper and much faster, because you can build so much faster when you build visually versus when you have to type every single line of code. It's going to be cheaper as well because it takes less time. You can build for cheaper. And I think the third thing that people don't necessarily talk often enough about is that I think it's a much more collaborative process, because it's a visual programming language. If you do decide to focus on the business and have somebody build for you, you can still see how the app works and see where there's like a button and what the button says, and like you can participate in the product development conversation, versus if it's actually written from scratch with code, like it's a black box, right? You have no control, or like you can look at the code, but you're never going to be able to like provide any feedback or input. And so if you do like want to look at that, if you click here, it will take you to our agency, which is just I think a listing of all the Bubble agency, like ecosystem of company providing professional services. And what's interesting is, you see, there's one in the Netherlands, right? So we have agencies all over the world, again, like because it's been 10 years and we've built such a rich community. There's people all over, and so I think this is a great agency that's local. And so even if you do decide to, like, if you don't want to build with an agency and you want to learn yourself, it might be interesting to reach out to these guys to try to maybe speak to one of the developer there, like meet the local ecosystem of Bubble developers. See, there's another one in Amsterdam here. So I think this is pretty interesting, just to get a sense of how global the community is. And finally, there's a link to the forum. That's something that I definitely encourage everybody to go to if you decide to start learning Bubble and start to interacting with the Bubble community, because the forum is where a lot of the Bubble conversation happens. I think as a new user, you can just go there and write like a welcome, like, hey, this is me, this is why I started my Bubble journey, I'm really excited, and just say hi and start a conversation, and people will respond. It used to be like a little village a couple of years ago. Now there's like a lot of people here, so it's more like a little city. But there's a lot of like older, very experienced Bubble users that have built like for years, and that help answer questions. If you have a question about Bubble, or if you're stuck in the app, I would say just go to the forum and ask your question, search your question, because it's very likely that somebody has had the same question and asked it and it was answered. So maybe the answer is already somewhere in the forum. So I would say the forum is a great resource. But again, I was just sharing the resources. We don't do any of that right now. We'll just go ahead and create our app. And so this is just going to load the editor and create our new Bubble app. Awesome. So now we are in the app. So the first thing that happens when you create a new app is you see on the left, there's a new application assistant that's going to ask you a couple questions. to kind of help set up your app. Again, because this is demo and live built and I'm here, we don't need to use the assistant. So I would recommend just closing the assistant here. But next time you start an app, maybe go through that process and you'll see they ask a couple questions about, like, for example, this little bee emoticon. You can add your own and you can set it up with the assistant. You can add, you can basically set up a couple of things from your app. But let's just close the assistant. And now we are in a blank page in the editor. Cool. So I'm going to spend probably about 10 minutes just talking about a couple of key areas of the editor, and then we'll build a few features of this simple to-do app, and then I can answer some questions, talk about learning resources, etc. So to get started, there's a few things that are important to note here. I just collapsed this just to make it clean, right? So this is your editor where everything happens. And you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tabs on the left. And you're going to constantly switch between these tabs. Right now, we are in the design tab. And I think you're going to spend a lot of time between design, workflow, and data, especially for this demo. So the first thing I'll talk about in the design tab is, so this is where you visually design all everything that you'll see on your app, right? Any text, right, or any buttons, icon, images. We call these elements. So we have visual elements, so text, buttons, shapes. We have like containers, so we have groups, pop-ups, etc. We have inputs, right? So Bubble is a web app platform, not a web app builder, not a website builder. And sometimes people don't always understand the difference between a website and a web app, and I think it's a very important one. A website is just visually displaying information to the user. And so what I mean by that, it's like a blog or a landing page or a newsletter, right? So it's interesting, but it's pretty limited in what you can do, right? You can only read what's on the site and maybe like click to subscribe, but that's about it. When you move to a web app, a good framework to understand what a web app is the CRUD framework, CRUD. And what that stands for is create, read, update, and delete. So with a web app, you need to be, with a web app, you should be able to create data, update data, read data, and delete data, right? And so, for example, the input elements are to create data, right? Like, so that you can like input your name or your email, you can input the date, and you can like add data to your database, right? By creating data. You can modify that data, you can delete that data, etc. And so these are some of the elements: visual elements, container elements, input elements. I'll just leave this one there. Before I move to the workflow tab, there's a few things I want to add. So at the top here, when you see page index, this is your page menu, right? So right now we are on the index page, which is kind of your landing page. And if you build like, I think today we'll just build a one-page app, so we won't switch between pages. But if you build a sophisticated app, there's probably going to be multiple pages, and so you move between pages. For example, we have like a reset password page that you can like customize to your design, and like all the design and workflows will be like specific to that page. So right now I'm editing this reset password page, and if I go back to the index page, I'm editing this page. The last thing I'll talk about before I move to workflows is this preview button that you see here on the right. So this will, if you click on it, it will open a new tab and it will show you how your app visually looks, like if you were to publish it right now. So right now it's like a blank page with like one text element that says test, right? That's the one you see here. And if I add a button, for example, and go back here and you just refresh, you'll see that now there's a button and this, right? So cool. Moving to the workflow tab very quickly. So again, this is where the app kind of comes to life, and this is what makes it like a web app more than just a website, is that you can create a lot of logic associated with elements, right? So for example, I had like text here, and let's say I add a button there. Is there a question? I think I heard.
Yes, Marek wanted to ask something. Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind, interrupt him?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I understand that this is a web app, but the preview, is there also a preview that's for like mobile, that you can see how it looks on mobile, or
Yes.
how do you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. A great question. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. I mean, I guess I can answer that question now. So there's this concept in web development called responsiveness, and that's just basically making sure that your app looks great on any size, right? Whether it's a gigantic desktop or a laptop or an iPad or a phone. And we actually just released our new responsive engine. And so if you click here on the responsive tab versus the UI builder tab, you can basically preview how your app looks on like a larger screen, a smaller screen, an iPad, or an iPhone, or phone. Sorry, not necessarily iPhone, any type of phone. Right now, I'm not building responsively because it's like we're doing a short demo, so we're just focusing on making it work on this screen. So this is why like my container layout is fixed, but I could, for example, if I switch it to row, it's going to change a couple of things in the app. But now that it's not fixed anymore, you can see kind of how it behaves on different screen sizes. The one thing that I'll add though is that Bubble was built at its core, like the primary use case of Bubble is the web, right? It's for web apps, not mobile apps. You can absolutely build on Bubble and build mobile apps, and I'm happy to share a resource. There's an article that we wrote for how to set up Bubble to build a mobile app. So I'm actually going to share that in the chat, and you can take a look. And it basically the steps that you have to take is first like build your app in here, right? Then make sure it's responsive for mobile, and then what you have to do is you have to use a service called a wrapper to be able to publish it in the App Store or the Android store. And so I would say just go through the blog, and it should answer most of your questions. It's not something like there's a lot of successful users that have done this. Like for example, Coins is one of is like a cool success story. So they're like a debt or loan company, and they have an app store, an app in the app store, and like they're like all this app, like it all runs on Bubble, and so you see like it's like it has like a good amount of people using it. It's well rated, and all the app is running on Bubble. And so it's definitely possible. We have a lot of users do it. I do want to say like it's not the primary use case for Bubble. There are a couple of other no-code tools that are specialized for mobile. I would say they're much more limited because it's more like they have a couple use cases and a couple of templates that you can use to quickly get to a design that works on mobile. Whereas Bubble, I view it less as a tool and more as a language, which means it's super wide in terms of like all the possible things you can do. So you have less limits on Bubble, but it's probably not, if you're trying to do something fairly simple, it's not necessarily the best tool to build a mobile app, I would say. Does that answer your question?
And just to add that they will have a live build with someone from Adalo, I think.
Okay, there you go. Adalo is the, I didn't necessarily want to mention any specific person name, but Adalo is like the mobile, one of the leading tools for mobile. I think Bubble is a better tool, but if you're trying to build a simple mobile app, I would recommend just building on Adalo. Unless you really like Bubble and you want to do something very custom. Because with Adalo, you'll run into like limits pretty quickly.
Okay.
It will be.
Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. Cool. And so I was talking about the workflow tab, which is where you start to add logic. And so, for example, there's two different ways to get to a workflow. So if I click here, I'm on the workflows for this page, and I can just create a new one, right? Like based on the state of the user. So if the user is logged in, I want to do X, Y, and Z action, or if like an element is clicked, or I can do like custom workflows. But I can also start a workflow directly from an element. For example, this button, I can just do start edit workflow, and it brings me back here, creates an event, right, when button A is clicked. I can rename that, and you should be pretty standard about how you name stuff, because the more elements you start to have, the more complex it will get. And so when button test is clicked, you can do a ton of different things. We're going to do a couple in the demo, but like sign the user up or navigate to an external website, or you can charge the user if you want to do some payment stuff. You can send emails, and so you can do like a series of action, right? There's no limits to how many different things you can do. So you can go to page, then sign the user up, then create a new data, and it can be like a series of action. And then you can have obviously a ton of different events, and they each can have a series of action. So there's very little limits into how well you can go with your logic. The third tab that's important is the data tab, because this is where on Bubble because you're building web app, a web app has a database and a data structure, and so you will be able to set up your data structure here again visually, right? And then to see all your data in this tab, app data, in kind of like an Excel-like manner. And so today we're going to build a very simple to-do app. So I'm actually going to quickly structure the data here. And so the way Bo thinks about data is we have data types, and then each of these types can have fields, right? So for example, every Bubble app comes with a pre-built user data type, and the user can have obviously as many fields as you want, but a user could have like a first name, last name, email, password. Like a different example of a type would be, for example, if you think of LinkedIn, a LinkedIn post could be a data type, and then that post could have a title, content, comments, likes. These would be all the fields, right? And so for our app today, we're building a super simple to-do app. So all we'll need is users, right? And we don't need first name, last name, or anything. I think all we need is just email, like the basic stuff should work. And then we'll add one more type, which will be our to-do, right? So we have users and to-do. And you'll notice like there's a couple of tabs here. I don't think you can explore them later. The only ones we'll use today is this one where we structure the data, and this one where we look at the data. And so you see that now we have two types, right? The to-dos and the user. And these are all the fields, right? If I'm adding field, it's going to add more columns. And right now, obviously, there's no data because we just created this app. And so for my to-dos, we're going to add a couple fields, right? The first thing we're going to want is like a title, right? What's the title of the to-do? And so the field name is going to be just a title. And then you can, each field can have a type, right? Whether it's like a text, a number, a date, etc. And so this is going to be a text, right? The title of our to-do. And so you see that it added title. And now if I go to app data, there's a new column called title. We're going to add two more fields, right? So for our to-dos, again, we're not going to get super fancy with it, but we're going to have three things. Each to-do is going to have a title. Then, for to-do, it's always good to have a due date, right? So we'll have a due date. And obviously, that's going to be a date, right? So we have title, due date, and then the third thing that we'll have is I think it's going to be quite convenient if we can tell whether or not it's been completed, right? Because we have a list of to-dos and we want to be able to complete them, right? And so the third field is going to be completed, ? And that's going to be binary, yes or no, right? It's either completed or it's not. And so these are our three to-dos, but we're actually going to go one step further, where you can assign default values. And we're not going to assign any default values for title or to-do, because title or due date, because everyone is going to have a different title or different due date. But for completedness, we're going to assign a default of no, because whenever we create a new to-do, by definition, it's not completed yet, right? And so you don't have to do this, but it's good, like database design practices, where every new to-do that's going to be created by definition should not be completed yet, which is why we should set the default to no. And so now that's it. This can be as fancy as you want it to get, but you can see how pretty quickly we can design like a very simple database structure with users and to-dos. And then if we go to our app data, we see that now it has a completed due date, title. There's still no data because we haven't created data, but the structure now is there. I'm just really quickly going to introduce these few tabs, but we're not really going to use them today. The style tabs is actually very useful. And if you do build like a more complex app on Bubble, you probably spend some time here. It's basically a way to standardize your style throughout the apps. And so you can look at different types of elements. These are all the pre-built styles, and then you can create as many new styles as you want. So let's say for the button, you'll probably have like a primary button, a secondary button. And so for each of these different buttons, or it could be different checkboxes, or it could be different text or image. So let's look at the buttons, right? The primary one, this is the design. So we want that design to be of this color, to be centered, to be of this font, etc. And then once you're in your design tab, if you're playing with a button, you can assign the button styles, right? Primary, secondary. And so then basically you can have like a very standard visual identity, right? Let's say you have 100 buttons all throughout your apps. They'll all have the same style. And then if you decide to change the style, right? Let's say if I change the color here to something like yellow, it's going to obviously update all my buttons that have that style. And so it's a very good way to it's a very good way to be able to have like a uniform design all throughout your apps. The plugins tab is I think you'll understand it probably more as the integrations tab. This is how you can integrate with a lot of services, and I think it's one of Bubble's strongest feature. Is that you can add what we call plugins. So plugins is a way to really extend your Bubble app. I'm just going to go quickly to the plugins page to show you. And so that's what we use, for example, to connect to an external API. And so what I mean by an external API is you can basically talk to send and receive data from an app. Like, for example, if you want a map in your app, like, and you want to use Google Map, you'll have to set up like that works through Google Maps API, where you use their API to be able to have access to all of their location data. If you use Stripe for payment, it's going to be very similar. And so if you want to do something interesting with data, you'll probably use the API connector. If you want to do something with payment, you'll probably use the Stripe payment. There's a couple of very core important plugins like that. And so Bubble, like ourselves, the Bubble team built like a couple of the core key first few plugins. I think we built about 30 of them. But what's really interesting, I think, is the plugins that were built by the community. And so just like I talked about templates earlier, we also have community created plugins. And because they're like all the Bubble ones are free, obviously, like they come with the platform. But the community built plugins, they can be free or paid, right? If I'm me, Theo, I want to build a plugin, I can build it, I can price it however I want, and then anyone in the community could use it. And there's like, I think over 30,000 plugins. And so there's a lot of really, you can look, search them by category. So there's a lot of interesting video plugins to do things with Zoom or things with Vimeo or things with, you know, a TikTok-like swipe. We have some plugins for mobile. We have some plugins for e-commerce. There's a lot of for web scraping. There's a lot of really interesting options for you to pick from. And so if you go to the profile of one individual plugin, you'll see like it's been installed X amount of time, right? So you see that this one has been installed 300,000 times. So this kind of gives you a confidence level, right? Like it's probably okay for me to use this plugin if it's been used like 300,000 times, right? With the Bubble build plugins, you don't even have to ask yourself this question. But with any community build plugins, I would say just look at how many times it's been installed. It's usually been reviewed, and you can actually even get in touch with the builder if you actually have some question, right? This was built by Misha V, and you can contact them and be like, hey, like I'm building my app with your plugins. Maybe you want them to update the plugins. You can even start a conversation with the developer if you're interested. You don't need to do all that, but like if you want to go far, you can. And so going back to our app, this is basically once you're in your app, or you can install your plugin. And so, for example, if I want to do some stuff with payment, I'm probably going to use the Stripe plugin. So you see, like by Bubble means we built it, and by any other name means it's built by the community. And so let's say we want to use a Stripe plugin, I'll just install it. I talked about APIs earlier. Let's say I want to use the API connector, I'll just install it. And when you press done, you see like the list of plugins you've installed, and then you can set them up. And so this is really how you can like completely open up the limits of your app, unlock all the limits of your app of Bubble's platform by really leveraging the 30,000 plus plugins that were built by the community. The last tab here is like the settings tab. This is like pretty standard. This is where you can see the plan, which plans you're on, some general settings about your app. This is where you set up your domain once you're ready to publish your apps, etc. And then the last one is the logs. It's not going to be super interesting now because there's no data. But if you push your app, if you deploy your app and it's out in the world, you'll see some traffic information. So, you know, number of visits, number of workflows that were run, etc. And so this will happen in the logs tab. And so this is like, I think that's enough for like a basic intro of how everything works. Obviously, there's many more buttons that you can go and search and look for. I would say a great resource that you can use is the Bubble manual. So for example, if you click on any, on most things actually within Bubble, and you just click the little information and you click on see reference, it will take you to the manual, Bubble manual, which is, this is very text heavy, but it has everything about Bubble in there and it's pretty easily searchable. So if you have a question about an element, for example, this was a button and I click from there, it brings you to the element tree documentation. You have some videos, some explanation, and then you can search the app. For example, if I have a question about APIs, you can, using the API, and you can come across any sort of documentation about anything relevant to your app. I would say definitely take advantage of that if you have a question as you go. So let me delete that. And so as I said, we'll build a simple to-do app, right? So let's just get started. The first thing I'll do is I'll add a little image and I'll upload a logo. If you don't have the female switch logo on your computer, shame on you. I'm joking. So you can just forget that step or like upload whatever image you have on your computer. And then I'll just add a little text, which will be what to do, ... and then I'll add some style. We'll just do like heading, just to make it nice and pretty. Up. And now if I preview my app, I should see just like a logo and a title, just a few steps for a to-do app, right? The next thing I'll do is I'll use a container element actually to create like a big group in which I'll have most of my to-do, like the bulk of my app. We'll call it group to-do. And inside this group, we'll add a few things, right? The first thing we'll add is like a text element at the top left, which will be the date, right? Because if you open your to-do app, it's always nice to see today's date. And so with this technically is the same element as this, right? This was a text that was just static text. I just typed what to do and it was the title. But just like you could type anything like that. But what you can also do is you can have dynamic data, right? Which is when it gets, I think, more interesting. And so we're going to click on Insert Dynamic Data. You have a lot of different options, and we can just scroll down until we find the one we want. But it's actually searchable. So we're looking for a date. So I would say just search date, and that's exactly what we want. We want the current date and time, and we're actually going to click on more because we want to format that. So formatted as, and then you can pick. You have different options to format your date, and I want the full date. I'll give a bit more space. Now, if I refresh my page, I should see Wednesday, July 20th, 2022. Perfect. And so that's the first step, right? And then what we are going to do is we're going to start to play with inputs. We're going to create the ability to create new to-dos. So remember how I told you right now, if we look at our data, there's nothing there because we didn't create anything. We're going to create the inputs so that we can start to add new to-dos. So I'm just going to create a small input. I think there's a question. So if
yes. Why do you need a container from Marika?
Hi, yeah, it's me again. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. So why do you use the container in this case? What's the use of container?
Yeah, I think it's it's all gonna when I move the container, I can move this whole group. I think it's good design practices there's two sections in my app. There's like the top where you have the title and the logo, and then the container. Because this is a quick demo, we're not going to get too fancy, but what I would add if I were to do the next step is I would add like a login feature, and I would only show this container if you're logged in, right? So if you open the app, there's just the title and the logo, and then once you log in, this whole thing becomes visible. And in order to do that, you kind of I could just do it element by element, or I could just take the whole container and say and go to the layout and say it's invisible, and then I'll add a condition and I say it's only visible once the user is logged in. But because we're not going to build the login feature right now, because we're just building this is just a short demo, we're actually not going to do that. But I would say it's just a good design practices. You don't need to put it all in the container, and you feel free to not put it in a container. But I think it's a nice way to, for example, let's say if I'm here and I want to recenter it, I haven't talked about that, but this just gives you some layout options. The arrange button. If I want to center it horizontally, it centers the whole group, right? Whereas if this was out of the container, and then this was out of the container, let me just delete the container. Like I can't really center the group anymore, right? If I center this and I center this, it's just center on the page, right? And so I would say it's just a nice way to group things together. It's not critical right now for the context of this app, because again, it's a really simple one. But let's say you want to like keep building the app and add more features once you continue after this demo. It's going to be, I think, convenient to have everything in a container. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great question. Cool. If there's any other question, feel free to shout, and otherwise I'll just keep going. So I added my first input element. Maybe I'll just restart because maybe some people lost me because I was answering the question. So I had the container, I added the dynamic date, which was today's date, and now we're gonna add an input, right? So I click on the input and I'll just draw it here. And so this is a text input, and you can edit the placeholder if you want. So let's just say we'll say what to do. And then I'll add another input for the date. And so we actually have a pre-built input for that called date time picker. So I'll just draw it on the app. Sure. It's going to be exactly the same height. Up. So this is input, this is the date, and now we'll add a button to, because right now, let me just pause and test just to show you. Right now we have the two inputs, right? And I can type whatever I want. I can select the date. It's all great, but like, what am I going to do now? What I want is to save that information as a new database item, right? I want this to become my new to do. And for example, I just draw test one. I want test two, or like walk the dog. Let's say I want to do that on the 22nd on Friday. I need to be able to, we're going to add a button, and then we're going to create the logic so that when we click on that button, it takes this and that and puts then a new to do and add it to the database, right? So we're going to click on the button and we're going to add a button here. And the button is going to be add to do. I'm actually gonna, and so now that I've added the button, if I just show you how it looks, it's good. There's a button, but again, like we didn't create any logic. So if I click here, there is like some preset styling, as you can see when I hover it, which is nice, but there's nothing we can do, right? Because we didn't create logic yet. So we're going to click on that button, and we're going to create our first workflow. So we're going to click on Start Edit Workflow. And then, you've seen this when I was introducing the workflow tab before, but it's basically when the button Add to Do is clicked, what do we want to do? What we want to do is we want to do something with the data, and we want to create a new thing. So Bubble, because it's for a non-technical user, at its core, it tries to use like friendly language, right? So database item, we call them things. So we want to create a new thing or make changes to a thing or delete a thing. And so if you click on create a new thing and you specify what thing you're talking about, right? And so here you'll see the list of all your data types, except for user, because you can't create a new user like that. And right now we only have one, which is to do. So again, it's a simple app, but you could have like 10 different options. And so we're creating a new to do, and you see that it just updates the language. Right now we're creating a new to do and creating a new to do, whereas before it was just thing. And so we're creating a new to do. We're saying when you click on the button, we want to create a to do, and now we can set like the type is to do, right? And to do has a couple of fields. If you remember, it has 3 fields: the title, the due date, and the completed yes or no, right? If we go to the data and I show you the structure, to do has 3 fields: completed, due date, and title. And so in the workflow, you can set these fields, right? You can set them one by one, or you can click add all fields, which will literally display all of the fields. So if I click there, it shows add all fields, completed, due date, or title, and we can specify what we want them to be, or you can add them one by one. Let's say we start with title, and we say the title is going to be whatever value was in the input, right? Input what to do's value, and input what to do. If you go to the design, is this, right? We could change the name, and it will recognize that name. By default, it took the placeholder as a name. So this is input what to do. This is date time picker. Let me just remove date time picker to do. And this is button add to do, right? So if I go back to my workflow, the title is going to be input what to do's value. And you see if you hover over it, it will show you which input it is to make sure it's the correct one. The other field that we're going to set is the due date. And that's going to be the date time picker's value, right? So we're saying create a new thing. That thing is going to be a to do. And the title is going to be whatever was in that input. And the due date is whatever was in that due date input. And then the third one is completed yes or no, but we actually don't need to set that one because we've preset it to be no, right? If we hadn't done this default equals no, what we would probably have to do here is completed equals no, right? Because every new to do that you create by definition should not be completed. But because we've set it to no by default, we actually don't have to specify this. All we need to specify is the title and the due date. And so now if I test my app, let's see if it works. Right, so I said walk the dog. So we want to do that tomorrow, and we'll add the to do. And so it's interesting, right? We don't really know what happened. We don't know if it worked. I actually think it worked, but there's a couple issues still there, right? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to verify if it worked or not. And a good way to do that is if this logic worked, technically we should have a new item in the database, right? So if we look at our app data, there it is, right? There's a new to do that was created: walk the dog, due date tomorrow, and completed no. The problem though is like we don't really have a lot of visual cues that it happened. So the first thing that we're going to do to fix this, it's the last part of the demo, is we're going to actually show the list of the to-dos. And so when you click add, it will actually display it on the list. But the other thing is we kind of want to reset these elements, right? It's a good way to reset this. The default of the date is today, and then the default is what to do, right? And it's actually a good practice, and I think you'll see if you start to pay attention, it always is the case when you create a new action or a new database item, or when you finish signing up and you click like sign up, it kind of resets all the elements. And so in Bubble, what you do is you go back to that workflow. And so that step was to create new to do. And the second step, Bubble actually recommends it because it's always something you're going to want to do. So it's a recommended next action is to reset all the inputs. So you could use the search bar to find it, right? Reset relevant inputs, or you could find it in element action, reset input, or you could just like click here because Bubble knows it's something that you're going to want to do. And so if you have that, let's just add a second database item and you'll see how it works differently now. Have lunch with Max. Max is my brother. So say I want to do this next week. I've seen him enough. So if I have lunch with him next week and I add this to do, you see how it reset everything? We still won't see it because we haven't displayed it yet, but now at least we have some visual confirmation that something did happen. And if I go back to the database, I'll see that now we have 2 to-dos: walk the dog and have lunch with Max. Awesome. So this is working the way we want. The last step that we'll do for this demo is we'll display these actually below here. And we're going to use my favorite element, and I think one of the most powerful elements in Bubble, It's a container because that's going to contain all of that data, and it's called repeating group. And I'm going to just drag it here, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. And so there's two things you need to do. There's two steps to setting up a repeating group. The first is telling it like what data to display, what data to look at, and then what data to display. And so it kind of works. I think a good example to explain the repeating group is social media or social networks. If you think of Instagram, for example, right? If you're looking at your feed, there's a list of posts, right? And each post has like a picture, like an author, some comments, some likes. They're all like different, right? Because the data is different, but the structure is exactly the same, right? Each post is going to have the little picture on the top left, the name of the author, the picture element, and then a like button, a comment button, and then the list of these likes and comments, right? And so in a similar way, right, what we want here is like a list of all our to-dos, right? And in each of that list, we'll display like a few things, right? The title, the due date, but the structure of that list is going to be the same, right? It's just the content that's going to be different every time. And so what you can do with repeating groups is you just structure the first one, and you tell it like use that same structure for every single to-do that there is in the database, right? And so this is going to make a bit more sense once I set it up actually. So let's put it in the center. And so the first thing you need to do is you need to tell it what type of content am I looking at. So what we're looking at right now is to-dos, right? We want this to be a list of to-dos. And then you specify the data source, right? And the data source here is going to be a search. We're going to search the database for all the to-dos. And so we're going to do a search we're searching for to-dos. And so this basically tells this group, search for all of the to-dos. And we're going to do one more thing. We're actually going to refine the search. We're going to say, I'm adding a constraint. I'm saying I only want to look at the to-dos that have not been completed, right? If the to-do is done, I don't want it on this list, right? Because if it's completed, then you don't have to do it anymore. So I'm saying look at the database, search for all the to-dos, and only keep the ones that are completed equals no. And the last thing I'll do is I'll sort by due date, because then you'll see the most pressing ones first. And so this is it for structuring the database. And I could set it to be like a list of rows or a list of columns, right? Like horizontal or vertical. For this list, we want it to be vertical, so it's like 4 rows and 1 column. And then we'll add more rows as we have more to-dos. And the last thing we need to do now, like if I show this to you right now, you're not going to see anything, right? Because like this little group, you see this line actually from the group. The repeating group knows what data to look at, exactly the right one, but we haven't told it what to show actually. And so what we want to show is some dynamic text, right? I'm just going to set up that first column first, and you see how it populates everything. And whatever logic we put here, it's going to apply the same logic to every single row. And so the logic we're going to use is we're going to look at the current sales to do. So it knows that it's to dos because we've structured the repeating group to look at to dos. And so when you're going to look at the current sales to dos title, let me give it a bit more space. If I refresh this now, you should see the two titles, walk the dog and have lunch with Max, right? And we're actually going to copy paste this and add, I just use Control-C, Control-V. And we're going to add one more dynamic text, which is going to be similar. The current sales to-dos due date, right? Showing the title and the due date. Walk the dog, July 1st. And we could format that date to not have as much detail if we actually wanted to. So if I go to more formatted, yeah, it's just a date like that. This should be a bit better. Actually, whatever, you can have your own preference. You can add everything or just the due date. And the last thing we're going to do here in that group is we want to be able to complete them, right? Check it if it's done. So we're going to use an icon, and I'm going to draw that icon. You want to make sure it fits in the cell. Otherwise, if I delete this, let's say if I were just to like add a big icon like that, like it gets confused, right? If it's not properly set in the right cell, it's going to be a little bit difficult. So what I would recommend is you don't just click and click, you actually draw it to make sure it fits exactly the way you want. And so I'll put it here, and then you can search for the type of icon. There's a lot of different options. I'm going to look for something that's a check. So this looks great. If I preview this right now, you'll see that we have the title, the due date, and a check. We can remove the space between them, but it's actually fine with me. And like nothing happens, right? Because we need to create that last piece of logic. But the idea is we want to be able to click on this and complete the to-do, right? And so we're going to add one more workflow here, start edit workflow from that icon. And what happens when we click on that icon, right? So we have two events in the page, one for when we create a new to-do and one for when we click on that icon. And what we want to happen is last time we were creating data, now we actually want to modify data. So we're making changes to a thing. And the thing that we're changing, again, we're in a repeating group, so it knows that we're looking at the specific row. So it's saying we're changing the current cells to do. And what we're changing about it is we're changing completedness, right? And it used to be no, the default, not completed. And now it's going to be yes, it's completed. And now try to remember when we set up the repeating group, right? If I click on the repeating group and I look at the data source, we're looking at the to-dos that have not been completed, which means that if I check this box, it's going to become completed equals yes. And therefore, it's not going to be in this list anymore because it's going to be filtered out. It's not going to be deleted from the database. It's always going to be there, but it's not going to be displayed anymore, right? So if I test this right now, right? Let's say have lunch with Max, I'm done with it. Just check this. It's gone, right? I didn't delete it. I just modified that data, right? If we go to data and we refresh the data, now have lunch with Max completed equals yes. And so yeah, that's about it. I'm going to add one more piece of fun logic just to show you that you can quickly get quite fancy actually with Bubble, just a few minutes. So I'm going to add one more step to that workflow. When we click on that check icon, we change it to completed equals yes, right? So it will remove it from the list. And we're going to do one more thing, which is send an email. And let's say I'm going to send myself an email. This is my email, and I'm going to be, you can actually have, again, just static data or dynamic data, right? So what we're going to do is send, and then it's going to be Theo. The subject is going to be dynamic. The subject is going to be the current sales to-dos title, right? Whether it's walk the dog or have lunch with Max. And you can combine dynamic and static, right? So current sales to-dos title has been completed. And the body is going to be like, congrats, current sales to-dos title has been completed. And so now, if I just quickly demo this one more time for you, there's one more, walk the dog, let's complete this. So this should have done two things, right? A, it removed it from the list because it marked it as complete. And B, I'm going to show you this new email that I just got, just to demonstrate that it works quite quickly. Let me just check my emails. There we go. I'll stop presenting just to show you. But this, oops, there's a blur. It basically says, I can read it to you. It says, walk the dog has been completed. And again, like you can, once you set up the domain, you can make it so that it comes from the right email. Right now, it just says like the name of my app, right? Female switch, Theo demo at bubbleapps.io. That's who sent the email, but it could be like Theo. And then the subject is dynamic, right? Walk the dog has been completed, and the actual email is dynamic. And so like super simple, right? The app works. It's live, like just my real email, my real phone, and I just like completed the to do and sent an email. And so like I'm just gonna share again. We didn't do like we just scratched the surface, right? We didn't get super fancy. We didn't even do like any login, log out because it was a short demo, and I spent more time like talking about the different areas of the editor, which I think was important. But we actually did quite a bit, right? We played with dynamic data, with static data. We were able to create data in the database, modify data by flipping that completed from yes to no. We built like our first data structure, right? So if you've never built an app before, you've never had to deal with that. And it sounds scary if you've never like talked about or learned about database design in the past, but it's not that scary, right? It's actually quite simple. If you've used Excel, like you'll be very familiar with this. And so it takes time, but the more you build, it gets addictive, and you'll get better and better the more of these you create. And then there's something called like good database design practices. And so, for example, you'll run into questions like, should this be a type or should this be a field, right? Because, for example, maybe the to-do can have, for example, if you're talking about Instagram, each post has comments, right? And comments are a series of comments. And so that's maybe a type within a type. Like it can become quite complex if your app becomes quite complex. But like I would say, just take it step by step, start simple. And like there's a ton of resources online out there for you to learn. And yeah, that's I think about it for a little to-do app. So thanks so much for spending this hour-ish with me. I think if you've built with me, that's awesome. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to go and watch the recording. But this was the quick bubble demo. To go back to, I think, why we're here and why we're doing all of this at the core, because I think there's a huge social mission behind what we're doing at Bubble that I think the founders talk about it a lot, but I always try to mention it whenever I introduce the platform, is that the real goal here for us is to empower everyone to build software, because we strongly believe, especially in the 21st century, and especially like I'm talking to an audience of women, right, which have traditionally been excluded from that industry. And we really think it's one of the most, like computer literacy is one of the most important social issues to solve. And so I invite you all to, jump in, whether it's with Bubble, with a DAO, with any no-code tool, or with actual programming, whatever works for you. I think you should definitely join and help us, accelerate that movement to empower anyone to do this, right? To build software, because that's exactly what we did. It wasn't like fancy software, but this is a piece of software. It's a very simple one, but there's a couple of really interesting components to it, and you could imagine how this could get more complex quite quickly. So thank you. In terms of like resources for next steps, if you're excited to learn, I'm gonna spend like an additional minute talking about the academy, but bubble.io/academy is kind of our learning hub where we have a ton of free and I think some paid as well if you want to go further learning resources. And then if you have any questions and you need some help or some support, I would say just go to bubble.io/support. We have an awesome support team that is like, when I joined, I did like a rotation on that team, and I know most of them. It's a group of great people, and they'll get you to the answer and unblock you as quickly as they can. Again, if you want to find me on Twitter, like the place where most of the conversation about Bubble and no code happens actually is Twitter. So I would say definitely if you have a Twitter account and you want to start to follow the Bubble conversation, I would say follow us on Bubble. So at Bubble, you can follow me if you want, and you'll start to see like some of the kind of Bubble influencers. And I would say just follow them. It's a super nice community. They share tips. They build in public, so they share updates about the project they're working on. And yeah, reach out with any questions. As I said, I wanted to mention, spend just a little bit of time talking about the academy. There's a couple of different ways to learn. You can learn by watching. So we have interactive lessons and video lessons. And I think one of them like walks you through building a to-do app. We have text-heavy resources like the manual that I had mentioned. There's like 30 plus chapters. So it's very text-heavy, but it's quite easy to search. So if I go back to, I have the manual somewhere here. Let me just open it. If I just open the manual, I think I mentioned my favorite element, and I think one of the most complex that we looked at today was the repeating group. My internet is a bit slow, I'm sorry. And so if you search for the repeating group, yeah, my computer is slow. I'm sorry. Like, just search the search. There we go. Repeating group. So if you search for repeating group, you'll have like a short 2-minute video about how to use the repeating group. And we'll talk about like type of content, data source, which we did, right? We set it to be to-dos, how to set up your layout, etc. So like, once you do targeted searches, if you know what you're looking for, you just search for it and read the article. It's a really, really valuable resources. And then, as I said, you can get a jump start with templates. You can work with a coach. There's some bubble bootcamps out there in most languages, actually, because there are people teaching bootcamps in France, in the UK, in the US, in Brazil, and probably in the Netherlands too. So, I would say get started. This is what the academy actually looks like. It's bubble.io/academy. And, if you show the resources here, learn your way, as I said, watching, reading from others or with a template. The video resources are, I think, a really great resources because it's very digestible. It's, there's like 115 of them, I think, and they're kind of grouped into different topics. And I would say it's like very short, 2 to 4 minutes video. So it's quite easy to digest. And we also like group them into playlists. So these are like the crash courses. So for example, build your first bubble app. I think it's a recipe sharing app or something like that. And then so if you start that crash course, it's just a series of probably 20 videos, and they're all, start the first one, it's just 50 seconds, right? So it's very easy to watch and to follow. And actually, like this whole platform, right, Bubble.io was built on Bubble, right? You can see it here. And so if you start to think about it, you see that like group here, the list of video. I think this is a repeating group, right? And each row is like one section. Well, each row is the same, right? Same structure. And so we only structured it once, where we have like a little picture of a preview, the title, the start here, right? And then it keeps going through the database of all the videos that we have and displays them. So you can start to think about how this was built if you start to understand how to use the platform. So yeah, I think that's it for the resources. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I think we have about 10-ish minutes for questions if there are any. And yeah, again, I do want to reiterate, you should totally start for free, but if you do want to get serious and eventually sign up for a paid plan, use the credits, take advantage of that resource, and have fun.
Yeah, just to mention about the credits, actually, one of the users has already asked, and it seems there's a problem with the code. Maybe something went wrong, so just make sure that Theo will get in touch and we'll verify.
Yeah, I would say email me. If that person is still here, can you just explain what was the issue?
Benedicta, come on, what did you do?
I'm not putting you on the spot though.
Oh, where is my camera? Yeah, I just went to the link Violetta gave to me and tried to fill in the data and the information, and then it was written there that program code invalid. That's it.
What's the code that you use?
Yeah, it's the one that I gave her. Do you want me to put it in the?
Does it start with like Q2BKWTFJ?
Yeah.
And then because on my end, I just tried to use the code and it seems like it's working. Benedicta, maybe there's an extra space. You have to be careful. Like you have a space as a character, so if you left a space at the end, maybe that's why. So can you check if there's a space? It needs to be the exact code. But if you put that code in the section that says affiliated accelerator incubator VC code, that it should work. I can actually share my screen if you want, but.
Yes, please, because if I click the link Violetta sent to me, then
Okay, I'll just share my screen and show you. So this is the page you're on, right? Perk application.
Yeah.
Are you logged in? Because
I logged in using my Gmail
cool.
account.
Awesome. And so like when you're on this page, you already see like your email that was pre-populated, right? You don't see a button that says login, right?
No, I need to submit application.
Yeah. So you see how like this is the code that I have here? if I add anything to it, it's gonna say program code invalid, right? But this is the exact code, and if I have the correct code, it works on my end. Maybe, do you mind sharing your screen? Maybe that will be easier for me to help you and debug this.
No, I will try it again. Wait a second. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess if you're joining from your phone, you might not be able to share your screen, but
yeah, I'm trying. Oh wait, so I need to.
Yeah, but it should still. Let me see. You obviously need to answer the other question, but it should still work. Can I G2B KW? Can you scroll all the way up? All the way up. Actually, can you go up? Yeah. Welcome to the application. Can you just go on the top right? I just want to make sure you are logged in. Click on menu. You're logged in, so it should be fine. Up, scroll down to the code, because that's the section that we need to fix. TFJ. Can you click there and the code? Yeah, you have a space. Yeah,
Yep.
Now you remove the space, and then maybe at the beginning there's a space, maybe before the Q. Can you check?
Nope.
And now it still says program code invalid. That does not make any sense because on my end it's working.
Bubble. Congratulations.
Can you? Okay, I'm gonna. Let's just start that again. Can you refresh this page?
Can we have someone else try it? I'm gonna send the instructions here.
Maybe it's there. Yeah.
Because I just tried on my end and it's working. So I do know that the code works, at least for me.
Well, I sent the instructions in the chat if someone wants to try to figure it out.
Benedicta, did you refresh the page? Because I would say just restart the whole thing. Log out, log back in, then open. Yeah, we'll just take it step by step because it should work. So let's just take it slow, and we'll get there. So I would say refresh the page, log out, log into your account, then click on the link that Violetta just shared in the chat.
I'll try that. I'm trying. Okay.
Well, while Benedicta is trying, I can the silence, the awkward silence. So, for those of you that want to dig a bit deeper into Bubble, we do have a module on that in Skill Lab, as you might have seen. And we have a few links there to Bubble Academy that Theo just demonstrated. I think I put the link to the Bubble Essentials, so the very basic one, and then you can do other things. We also have a presentation that we did ourselves. I think it might be also about a to-do app, so you can rewatch that video and also go through that presentation. So there's a few things there that you can do. And of course, you can submit your to-do app as part of your homework and get some tokens for that.
Awesome.
Looks like working now.
Great. Sometimes you just have to take a deep breath, restart, and there was probably a typo or a mistake somewhere, but that's awesome. So cool.
Yes, thank you.
Well, is anyone actually going to try to do it at some point?
It looks like Benedicta is on her way.
Well, she's very competitive, so she has to.
That's awesome.
If she doesn't, I'm going to shame her. She has to. She has to. You have to be the ambassador now, Benedicta. Others are going to follow you.
Great. I'm doing my best.
Yeah. But really, it's within 1 hour you can do this. And I actually did my first to-do app a year ago when I got just started with Bubble. Of course, mine was a bit different. I had a lot of wine drinking to do things, so it was very fun to click on done every time I had a glass of wine. But yeah, I still remember. So it's been a year, but I still remember that feeling when yeah, you're creating something out of nothing, right? So without coding, that was one of the greatest feelings that I had when I understood, hey, even non-technical people like me can actually visualize something that I have in my head and that I can show to others instead of telling them what it is.
Yeah.
Because talking about female switch, for example, I can talk about it for hours, but actually showing it now that we have it and I can show it to people, it's so much clearer to them. It's so much easier. It's they understand what it is. So cool. Definitely for prototyping, for even if it's not for prototyping, something that I could also wanted to mention is if you are a person like me, and I'm a linguist by my first education, which means logic is not my strong suit, and I mean logic, not the female kind of logic, but the logic when, hey, if something happens, then B happens, right? Which is exactly what I think Bubble allowed me to switch in my head when I had to think in terms of not describing how something's gonna look, like in words like an essay, but actually saying, hey, you click that button, then that's gonna do that. That the data is gonna descend there. Where is it gonna descend? So there's a database there, right? So there's the front and back, and there is connection between that. So that absolutely switched my way of thinking. And now I can talk to developers without trying to kill them, because they would ask me questions that I wouldn't understand. I'm like, what do you mean? I don't know what that button has to do. Just do whatever. But now you have this common understanding, and of course that smoothens a lot of things.
That's awesome. Cool. Well,
no one has any questions. I'm gonna stop the recording. Yeah, last chance. No one, nothing. Okay. Well, I'm gonna meanwhile thank Theo for doing this workshop with us. I'm pretty sure a lot of people will also watch it. So yeah, thanks for doing this for us.
Yeah, that's my pleasure. I hope you take something out of it. Maybe you get started, you build your app, and the most important thing I think is learning, right? And I really like what you said, Violetta, about like changing your mindset about that whole word of logic and workflows and data. Like it sounds super foreign if it's not your background, but it's actually, once you bridge that gap, you can bring so much of what you know, right? Because you have a unique perspective. Whether you're a linguist, a doctor, a lawyer, right? And that's one thing that I think is beautiful with no code and with Bubble is, like, for example, if we give this tool to a doctor, right? They know everything about medicine, right? And their industry. And now you give them this power so they can start to build technology and build apps, and they have all the knowledge about the industry, and now they can actually create the technology to build some really interesting use cases and potentially massive businesses, right? So anyway, thanks for spending your time with me. I hope this was useful, and yeah, like, if you build something fun, share it on Twitter, tag me, I'll take a look, I'll give some love online. I love to do that. So yeah.
Definitely.